Hey friends, welcome back. This is Ashley with Uncommon Roots Homestead, and today we are doing something a little bit different. Today I am planning my fall garden. So garden planting is one of my favorite activities. I will admit I prefer planting the summer garden a little bit more than the fall garden. Mostly I think it's because when I'm planting the summer garden, I'm like in the thick of winter, right? It's cold. I haven't been able to be outside in a while. The garden is just a magical memory at that point. And for some reason, when I get to planting the fall garden, I'm kind of in the thick of harvest. I'm in the garden every day. It's a little out of control, a little wild, and sometimes it's hard for me to wrap my brain around planting another garden at this point. But it is the end of July. August is just a couple days away. So it is time to start planning for my fall garden. And in fact, it's really a little bit late. Usually I start planning the fall garden in the beginning of July so that I can plant the fall garden at the beginning of August. There are a couple of things there though, right? Planning a fall garden is different than planting a summer garden. A lot of times we think fall garden and we think, oh, cold. We think, oh, we're gonna plant in November. No. Fall garden is often just a succession planting. A lot of the things that I'm going to be planting in my fall garden are not going to survive through the winter. So they need to be at maturity before it starts to get really cold. Things like brassicas, even my leafy greens or celery, those things need to get established before it gets too cold, or else they'll just kind of be stunted. And even though they'll live through the winter, I'm not going to get anything off of them. So the goal is to get these plants to maturity before it starts to get really cold. So today I want to go over the types of plants that I am going to be planting in my fall garden, kind of the timeline that I follow here in East Tennessee, Zone 7A, and hopefully give you some ideas on things that you can plant in your fall garden. One note, so with the fall garden, this is also a good time to succession plant any of your warm weather crops that are short season. So anything like summer squash that produces in 40 days or less, here in East Tennessee, Zone 7A, I still have until mid-November before my first frost. So basically I have all of August, all of September, all of October. I have almost 90 days left before my first frost. So any crops that come to maturity in 90 days or less, theoretically, I can grow in my fall garden. But I don't always do that. So I've already succession planted my tomatoes. I did that in the beginning of June because right now I'm getting to the point where a lot of my tomatoes are getting sickly. I'm gonna start pulling them out shortly. I could plant another round of tomatoes, but I like to balance just because, a summer squash might come to maturity in 50 days, but if you only have 54 days before your final frost, you're only going to get 4 days of harvest. So coming to maturity just means the first fruit that it'll set. So I try to balance, how much fruit am I going to get off of something if I succession plant it versus if I, plant something that can go past that first frost, might I get more out of those? So at this time of year, we're getting a ton of tomatoes. I still have a ton that are gonna come off the vine. We don't really need any more tomatoes. I have already started putting away cans. I've got probably 20 cans of various different tomato things like salsa and sauce and whole tomatoes, crushed tomatoes. I've got all of those things already put up for the winter. So it's not really critical to me to have more tomatoes. We'll continue to eat them fresh. A lot of my plants are still looking healthy. About 70% are starting to look sickly, but I still have 30% that'll get us through the next couple of months. So I'm not going to be planting any more tomatoes. This is a good time to succession plant cucumbers, other vining things that are early season are going to produce in the next 40 to 50 days. That's really the timeline that I'm looking at. Anything more than 70 days, I probably will avoid because as the temperatures start to drop, those things are going to take a little bit longer to come to maturity. And it's just kind of pushing it too close. There are really good odds that I won't actually get to enjoy any of the fruit off of those. So, all of that being said, this year in my fall garden, really the only warm weather or like midsummer season vegetable that I am going to replant are beans. So beans are interesting. Most beans will have a couple of good runs throughout the season, and then you can rip them out and replant them. I did not have good luck with my beans over at the land, so what I am planning on doing is ripping out some of the damaged and diseased plants that I have over there on the trellises and planting my beans again. I have yard-long beans, I have dragon tongue beans, I have red noodle beans. I didn't really get to harvest any of those, and so I'm going to be succession planting all of my beans. Now, when you have beans, you want to look at the back, and this is 55 days till maturity. Now remember, I have about 90 days before my first frost, so that's plenty of time to harvest on these beans. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in the ground this week. Same with these. These are 60 days, so I have enough time. Now, if I grab a variety that is 75 days, I probably won't start these. So that's the yard-long beans. I probably don't have enough time for those. So beans, that's what I'm gonna do first. Also, if you're looking for a great way to store your seeds, these it's a photo storage container off Amazon. It is absolutely wonderful. So these are the same size. Seed packets are really similar in size, like 4x7 pictures. And so it's perfect. You can just put all of your seed packets in there. I used my handy dandy label maker to mark what was in each, and then I can just store these. There's a large container I can show you at the end of this video. So the other thing, so I've got beans, salad. So fall garden is a great time for all of your greens. In East Tennessee, it's still hot. August, September, those are some of our hottest months. So I will probably hold off on putting my lettuce in the ground till I'm a little bit closer to September, mid-September. When I put my garlic and onions in the ground, I'll start my lettuce. Next, I've got carrots. So right now I am pulling up all of the carrots that I planted in early spring. So it's a great time to succession sow some carrots. And the great thing about carrots is that if they don't get as big as I want before my first frost, I can just leave them in the ground. I can actually harvest them in the spring if I want. So there's plenty of time for those. Let me look at the back of one of these packets and tell you. It says sprouts in 12 to 18 days. In my experience, carrots take about 3 months to be the size that I want them to be. Every variety is going to be different. So I'll plant these in the next week or so, and then I will plan on harvesting these carrots right before my first frost, or maybe right after. A lot of root vegetables, if you let them go through one frost, are actually sweeter. Next, I have celery. So celery takes a long time. I tried to do celery in early spring and it just did not work out for me. So I am going to try again and see if I have better luck in the fall. So this will be a first for me. I don't have a lot of advice on celery in the fall, but I'm gonna try it. Next, I have herbs. So you guys have seen my herb garden. Most of my herbs are looking fantastic. There's not a lot that is needing to be replaced or anything like that. Most of my herbs are actually perennial herbs, or they're annuals that I'm letting reseed back into the soil. But there are a couple herbs that are, cold herbs. So things like chives do really well in the fall. So does cilantro. So cilantro does not like to be hot. We had cilantro in early spring. It did great through the spring. Once summer hit, it bolted and kind of just changed everything. It started to die back. So we're gonna be replanting our cilantro this week and hopefully get a great harvest of that before we fall into winter. So most famously, brassicas and kales. So brassicas are one of my favorite garden things, but they get so damaged by pests here in our zone, in our area with our climate in the spring that it's not even worth it for me. I harvested a couple of cauliflower and broccoli, but they were all small and they were full of worms. The benefit of growing brassicas in the fall garden is that the pest pressure is so much lower. A lot of the early spring pests that we deal with brassicas are gone by this time. So I'm gonna go ahead and start some brassicas again. Now, a lot of brassicas are longer than 90 days to maturity, but brassicas can withstand a frost. So the benefit of doing this, I'll start these seeds inside. It's too hot outside right now. I'll let them get about 8 weeks old. I'll transplant them back into the garden. By that time, our highs are gonna be in the 70s. It's not gonna be in the 90s anymore. And then they'll have time to really get big and established before it gets too cold, which gives me better odds of being able to harvest off of them this year. The other great thing about brassicas is that, so say I get them in a little bit late and they're too small and I don't get any harvest this year, they will come back and continue to grow in our zone next spring. Even though we drop to freezing and below freezing, we get to about 0 in zone 7A. That's how the zones work. Even though it will get down to 0, the brassicas will be totally fine, and in the spring they'll come back and I'll be able to harvest off of those really early. So I'm gonna go ahead and start my brassicas this week as well. Root vegetables. So root vegetables are one of my favorite early spring and fall crops. There are so many delicious root vegetables, and a lot of them store pretty well or preserve pretty well. So kohlrabi is something that I grew last year that I'm excited to grow again. It's a very interesting fruit. If you've never seen it, it grows above the ground. So I thought kohlrabi was a root vegetable. It's not. It's actually a brassica that grows above the ground, and it gets this really beautiful bulb. It tastes like, it's got a little bit of a cauliflower flavor, but it's a much smoother vegetable. So it cooks up similar to most root vegetables. We chopped them and we sauteed them, and they were absolutely delicious. So we're gonna be doing this again. And then I've got the rest of my root vegetables. So these are my beets and my radishes. Radishes are perfect because they're such short season. I mean, they're 30 days to maturity. Beets are a little bit longer, but we have plenty of time before the first frost, and they'll actually do fine after a frost as well. I also have, rutabaga. So I tried to grow rutabaga last year and it didn't work out for me. I'm gonna try again. You cook rutabaga really similarly to how you would prepare a potato. It is a root vegetable. It's very starchy, but absolutely delicious. So I'm gonna be trying that again as well. And then I've got turnips here and a couple of different types of radishes. So those are the root vegetables that I'm gonna be growing in my fall garden. So beyond all the vegetables, this is also a great time to replant any zinnias or any flowers that produce in less than X number of days, however many of days you have until your first frost. If you're not sure how many days until your first frost, just go ahead and go to google.com and type in your city first frost 2021, and it should come up. It's really important to understand when the temperatures are going to change in your area, because if you invest all this time and effort into all of your crops and all of your annuals just to have a frost kill them before you harvest, it's such a shame, and I've definitely been in that boat. So make sure as you're planting a fall garden, especially if you plan on succession planting any of your summer vegetables or your warm loving vegetables in the fall garden, make sure you're taking those temperatures into account. You want to consider something like peppers. Peppers take a long time to produce fruit, and they are warm loving crops, which means if it's down in the 60s, those pepper plants are not going to thrive. They're not going to be growing as fast as they could. And so you have to take those things into consideration. It might say 90 days to get your first pepper, but if your temperatures are too low, it's actually going to take a lot longer than that. So you might not get fruit at all. So make sure you take that into consideration as you're planning your fall garden. My next steps are going to be actually to map out what my garden looks like and start to identify which beds I'm going to be moving things out of. So I always plant my garlic and onions in September. So in East Tennessee, zone 7A, that is not necessarily common. Most people in my area plant their garlic in October, some even November. I like to plant in September because I get to harvest early in May, and I've never had an adverse reaction to that. It is early. I do see a lot of growth before the first frost, but we don't have severe enough temperatures here to really kill everything back. So it's always worked out really well for me. I mean, you guys saw how great my garlic and onion harvest was this year. So I plan to do that this year as well. So in the next week, that first week of August, what I'm gonna be doing is getting all of these seeds we talked about today either started inside or in the ground outside, which means I'm gonna be cleaning out a couple of those beds. I'll bring you with me as I do that and kind of show you what I'm looking for when I'm trying to make space and mapping in my head where I'm gonna put things. Keeping in mind that in a month, I'm gonna be putting my garlic and onions into the garden. So I need to make sure that I'm preserving space for those crops because they're so important. And it's one of those things that gardening requires a lot of foresight. You always have to be thinking, what comes next? What comes after the stage that I'm at right now? But friends, even if you're feeling overwhelmed with the summer garden, I want to encourage you, don't give up on the fall garden. The fall garden can be a magical place. It can be a place of reprieve from the heavy harvest of summer. And it also is an opportunity for you to really elongate your season and just get that much more out of your garden this year. Thank you for joining me today. You always have a place here in the planning for my fall garden and everywhere else here at Uncommon Roots Homestead. Until next time.